What drives a person to commit acts of extreme brutality? Could it be the result of trauma, mental disorders, or a simple pleasure in evil? From serial killers who terrorized entire communities, through senseless massacres, to the brilliant minds behind macabre schemes, many cases and crimes have shocked and still shock the world because of their brutality or coldness. These are the crimes that you will get to know today. Jeffrey Dahmer was one of the most notorious serial killers in the history of the United States of America. Between 1978 and 1991, he murdered 17 men, most of them young, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. His crimes were marked by extreme cruelty, involving abuse, necrophilia, and cannibalism. Dahmer lured his victims to his apartment with promises of money or relationships. He drugged them, strangled them, and then practiced necrophilia and dismembered the bodies. One of the most disturbing aspects of Dahmer's crimes was cannibalism. In July of 1991, Tracy Edwards managed to escape Dahmer's apartment and asked the police for help. He reported having been drugged and taken to the killer's apartment. Upon arriving at the location, the police found parts of human bodies, macabre photographs, and instruments used in the crimes. The crime scene was so horrifying that it shocked even experienced officers. Most of the victims were young men, many of them belonging to racial minorities and to the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, and other orientations community. Although he was deemed legally sane at the time of the crimes, Dahmer exhibited several signs of mental disorders, including psychopathy and necrophilia. He was sentenced to life in prison for his crimes. However, he was murdered by another inmate in 1994. Jeffrey Dahmer's case had a major impact on popular culture, generating various films, documentaries, and television series. On the 22nd of May of 2017, at the end of a concert by singer Ariana Grande at the Manchester Arena in Manchester, England, a terrorist attack was carried out by a suicide bomber identified as Salman Abedi, who detonated an improvised explosive in the exit foyer of the venue as audience members, many of them children and teenagers. The attack resulted in the death of 22 people, including children, and left more than 100 injured. Salman Abedi used a device loaded with nails and screws to maximize damage. He died instantly upon detonating the explosive. The act was claimed by the extremist group Islamic State, although the degree of the organization's direct involvement was unclear. The incident was classified as an act of terrorism. The city of Manchester immediately activated its emergency and security services, while authorities investigated possible accomplices. Salman's brother, Hashem Abedi, was later convicted for his involvement in planning the attack. The attack caused international shock. A memorial for the victims was held, including a benefit concert called One Love Manchester, organized by Ariana Grande and other artists, raising millions for the families of the victims.
Oh my God.
Ariana Grande, deeply affected by the attack, canceled part of her tour and became an active voice in support of victims and in causes against violence. She was named an honorary citizen of Manchester for her solidarity and actions after the attack. The attack in Manchester is remembered as one of the most tragic acts of terrorism in the United Kingdom in recent years and remains a milestone in the fight against global extremism. The case of the Zodiac Killer is one of the most intriguing and famous mysteries in the criminal history of the United States of America. This serial killer terrorized California in the late 1960s and early 1970s, committing a series of brutal murders and taunting the police with encrypted letters, phone calls, and mysterious messages. It all began in 1968, when David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen were murdered in a deserted spot in Vallejo, California. This was the first crime attributed to the Zodiac. After that, several murders began to occur in the region, all linked to the same perpetrator, the Zodiac. The killer sent letters to local newspapers, confessing his crimes and threatening to commit more. Some letters contained ciphers that the killer claimed would reveal his identity. Only part of those messages was deciphered. The most famous solution, sent in 1969, read, "I like killing people because it is so much fun." He signed his letters with a symbol, a circle with a cross inside resembling a crosshair. Eyewitnesses described him as a white man, around 25 to 45 years old at the time, stocky, wearing glasses. Various theories have emerged about his identity, but no suspect has been confirmed. Among those investigated, Arthur Lee Allen was one of the main ones, but the evidence was never conclusive. In 2020, a group of cryptographers solved one of the Zodiac's messages, but it did not reveal his identity. The Zodiac claimed to have killed 37 people, but authorities confirmed only 5 murders and 2 failed attempts. The Hungerford Massacre was one of the deadliest mass shootings in the history of the United Kingdom. It occurred on the 19th of August of 1987 in the small town of Hungerford, Berkshire, and it shocked the nation and led to heated debates about gun control. Michael Ryan, a 27-year-old man with mental health problems, started an indiscriminate shooting spree through the streets of Hungerford. Armed with several rifles and ammunition, he killed 16 people, including his own mother and an unarmed police officer, and injured another 15 before taking his own life. The event had a profound impact on British society, leading to a national debate about gun violence and mental health. The massacre hastened discussions about gun control in the United Kingdom, resulting in stricter laws governing firearm ownership and use. The community of Hungerford was marked by the tragedy, and survivors and victims' families had to cope with the psychological aftermath. The number of victims and the brutal nature of the crimes shocked the nation. The victims were ordinary people, ranging from children to the elderly, which increased the sense of insecurity. Although Ryan had mental health issues, the exact reasons for the massacre were never fully understood. Ted Bundy was one of the most infamous serial killers in the United States of America, responsible for the deaths of dozens of young women in the 1970s. He used his charm and good looks to gain the trust of his victims, often pretending to be injured with his arm or leg in a cast to appear harmless. Once the women offered to help him, he would abduct them, assault them, and kill them brutally. Bundy was also known to return to the crime scenes to revisit the bodies and commit necrophilia. His murders began in 1974, with the victims fitting a specific profile: young, attractive women with long, dark hair parted in the middle, which many believe was a reference to his ex-girlfriend, whom he never got over. Bundy operated in several states, such as Washington, Utah, Colorado, Idaho, and Florida, which made his capture difficult due to the lack of communication among local authorities. In February of 1978, after escaping prison twice, he was finally captured. His trial in Florida was widely televised, and he maintained a manipulative stance, trying to appear innocent despite the evidence. Bundy confessed to killing 30 women, but experts believe the actual number of victims is much higher, possibly exceeding 100. He was sentenced to death in 1980 and executed in 1989. Ted Bundy's case became emblematic for his ability to deceive and manipulate both his victims and the public. H. Holmes, whose real name was Herman Mudgett, is considered one of the first documented serial killers in the United States of America. He gained notoriety for building a macabre hotel in Chicago, which became known as the Murder Castle, during the World's Fair of 1893. The hotel, designed and built by Holmes, was a complex and labyrinthine structure, with secret passages, rooms with no exit, and even a crematorium. Holmes took advantage of the large number of visitors the World's Fair brought to Chicago, and used the hotel as bait for his victims. Holmes lured his victims to the hotel with promises of jobs, investments, or simply a place to stay. Once inside the hotel, Holmes subjected his victims to cruel tortures before killing them. After the murders, he dismembered the bodies and, in some cases, sold the bones to medical schools. Holmes was an intelligent and calculating man, capable of building a deadly maze and deceiving authorities for a long time. He was a master of manipulation and dissimulation, able to pass as a respectable and charming person. Although he confessed to 27 murders, the actual number of Holmes's victims was never confirmed. He was hanged in 1896, but his story continues to fascinate and terrify people to this day. The Nanking Massacre was one of the most brutal atrocities committed during the Second Sino-Japanese War. It took place between December of 1937 and January of 1938, after Japanese troops captured the city of Nanking, then the capital of China. It is estimated that around 200,000 to 300,000 people were killed, and thousands of women were raped, making it one of the worst war crimes of the 20th century. Nanking fell on the 13th of December of 1937, after a battle against Chinese troops who had defended the city for weeks. The Chinese resistance was quickly crushed, and the city became vulnerable to the Japanese army. The brutality was, in part, an attempt to intimidate China and ensure the country's submission to Japanese occupation. In addition, there was a mindset of dehumanizing the Chinese. Japanese soldiers captured and indiscriminately executed prisoners of war, male civilians, and even teenagers. Many were killed in mass graves, shot, or beheaded. in scenes described as macabre by witnesses. Women of all ages, including children and the elderly, were abused by Japanese soldiers. It is estimated that as many as 20,000 women were raped. Many were mutilated or killed after the assaults. The city was looted. Temples, homes, and businesses were destroyed. Civilians were burned alive in their homes or killed in extremely cruel ways. Some foreigners, including missionaries and diplomats, created the Nanking Safety Zone, where around 250,000 civilians sought refuge. Among these heroes was John Rabe, a German businessman and member of the Nazi Party who used his position to protect thousands of lives. Even today, the massacre is a point of tension between China and Japan. Some Japanese politicians and historians have minimized or denied the event, while China keeps the memory alive as a symbol of resistance. After the Second World War, the International Military Tribunal for the Far East convicted several Japanese officers of war crimes. Joe Metheny was an American serial killer known for his disturbing and bizarre story. Nicknamed the Cannibal Serial Killer, he committed brutal crimes in the 1990s in Baltimore, Maryland. Metheny not only murdered his victims, but also claimed that he used parts of their bodies in hamburgers that he sold to unsuspecting people. Metheny began killing in 1994, after discovering that his girlfriend had left him, taking their son with her. He initially went out to look for them, but he ended up taking other people's lives. He targeted vulnerable individuals, such as homeless people, drug addicts, and sex workers, luring them to isolated places. Then he attacked them brutally. Metheny claimed he chopped up parts of the victims, ground the flesh, and mixed it with pork and beef. He used this mixture to sell hamburgers from roadside stands. According to him, human flesh tasted similar to pork. Metheny was arrested in 1996 when a potential victim managed to escape and report the attack to the police. During questioning, he confessed not only to the murders, but also to acts of cannibalism. Metheny was sentenced to life in prison in 1997. In 2017, 20 years after his imprisonment, he was found dead in his cell. Pedro Alonso Lopez, known as the Monster of the Andes, is one of the worst serial killers in history. He confessed to raping and killing more than 300 children, mostly girls, in countries such as Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. Pedro approached poor girls between 8 and 12 years old, asking for help or information. He then took them to isolated places where he beat them, assaulted them, and strangled them. While in Ecuador, he was eventually arrested, and there he confessed to killing more than 100 girls. In 1998, he was released from a psychiatric facility for being considered healthy. Since then, his whereabouts have been unknown, and international police forces are still searching for him. The case of Pedro Alonso Lopez is one of the most shocking in criminal history. He represents the darkest side of human nature and makes us question how someone could commit so many cruel crimes. Harold Shipman was a British physician who became one of the biggest serial killers in history. Known as Dr. Death, he was convicted of killing at least 15 of his elderly patients. However, later investigations indicate that the real number of victims may exceed 250. Shipman generally chose elderly patients, often in terminal states, so as not to arouse suspicion. He injected lethal doses of morphine into his victims, falsifying death certificates and attributing the fatalities to natural causes. Shipman had extensive medical knowledge and was able to manipulate his patients' records to cover up his crimes. As a doctor, Shipman was a respected figure in the community, which made his actions harder to question. The families of the patients trusted him. The police began investigating Shipman after the death of one of his patients. Analyses of the causes of death and of the alterations in medical records led to Shipman's conviction. In 2004, Shipman was found dead in his cell after hanging himself. Harold Shipman's case shocked the world and raised many questions about patient safety and the importance of investigating suspicious deaths. Subscribe to the channel for more videos like this.